It's after 9 o'clock. We can get going. So happy Mother's Day to mothers in the room. And happy Mother's Day to you too, Norm. Uh, anyone else who celebrates, that's fine. So yeah, we're gonna finish talking about we're gonna talk about Ecclesiastes 10 and 11 today. Let me. It has Ecclesiastes 10, I think it is, has my I'm sorry, has one of my favorite verses in Ecclesiastes in it. That the first time I listened to it, I'm trying to think, I don't know where it's 10 or 11, somewhere in this. We have one of my favorite verses. My approach to these books has always been I start with listening to them. I've got an MP3 player, and I'll start listening to them over and over and over again. Usually, like while I'm sleeping, in the hopes that it's going to, Does anybody remember back? I think it was like in the 70s, where there was this movement that if you listen to things in your sleep, that you would learn it, and then you could learn a foreign language by listening to it in your sleep and all that. Doesn't work. At least it doesn't work for me. But you'll listen to it, and if you wake up in the middle of the night, it's still playing. You can listen to more of it. And I remember the first time I came through this particular passage, this particular verse. It's actually verse 10:19 that ends. Money is the answer to everything. That's in the Bible. Money is the answer to everything. And I thought, am I hearing that right? I'll think about it and then go back to sleep, and then a couple days later hear the passage again. Money is the answer to everything. I thought, okay, well, if you're going to take a life verse out of Ecclesiastes, which is not a good idea. Don't take a life verse out of Ecclesiastes. But today is May 14th, Mother's Day. And I thought about it, but I did not get any of the information about Mother's Day, so I don't know the story of Mother's Day, But I do know that it was on this date in 1607 that the English colonists first settled Jamestown in Virginia, which is the first permanent English settlement in British North America. Now, the Spanish had already been here. St. Augustine, Florida is the oldest city in the U.S. That's where the Spanish had done. But in 1607 was Jamestown, and so there'd actually been an English, we kind of get the idea that the Pilgrims started it all. Well, they didn't. It was Jamestown that started it. The Pilgrims just get better press because of Thanksgiving. But in 1643, Louis XIV became the King of France. Louis XIV, the Sun King. L'état c'est moi, I am the state. He became king when he was 4, and he was the king for a very long time, something like 70 years, a very, very long time. Again, an enlightened despot, and well known if for a number of things. I believe he built Versailles, the Palace of Versailles. But again, he is called the Sun King. King of France, starting on this date in 1643. In 1796, Edward Jenner first administered his smallpox vaccine. Edward Jenner. Now, prior to that time, prior to 1796, they had a smallpox vaccine, which was smallpox. They would literally cut a person's arm, like with a knife, and then they would take some vaccine, smallpox off of somebody with it. They would get one of the pustules, and the person would, when they did it that way, the person would would eventually catch smallpox. But I guess statistically, they figured that there was less of a chance that they were going to get it badly, or that they would get it enough, and it worked. It was one of those. It wasn't tremendously effective. I mean, it wasn't like 100%, but it was something like. It was a much higher percentage of people who got smallpox that way recovered and thus were immune than if they got it through the normal contagion routes. But that was. But Edward Jenner was the one who figured out that another disease, cowpox, which I'm assuming affects cows. I don't know. Not a doctor. Don't play one on TV. But that administering cowpox had the same effect. And so in 1796, he administered the first smallpox vaccine, and there you go. The rest is history. And I think smallpox has been declared defeated or declared dead relatively recently. Not, I mean, like 1985 or 1990 or something like that. They finally declared that there were no cases of smallpox. But be that as it may, 1796. In 1948, Israel, the nation of Israel, declared its independence. And the United States, under Harry S. Truman, recognized Israel rather quickly, within a few hours. And so the nation of Israel, it was a great day for the end times people. They figured that once Israel was a city, was a nation, then the Lord would return. Didn't happen that way. And there is an interesting question. Maybe if we ever get to doing Revelation, we'll get to the question of whether the nation of Israel today is in fact the biblical nation of Israel. So it's something to think about. Skylab was launched on this date in 1973. Remember Skylab? You know, I remember Skylab crashing. That's it. Skylab was launched in 1973. And this may not mean anything to anyone else but me in the room, but it was in 1988, on this day, the Carrollton bus collision took place. The Carrollton bus, does that mean anything to anyone? So you've got a bus load of kids coming back from Six Flags, going this direction. You've got a Toyota pickup truck going the other direction, okay, with a drunk driver, and I believe he was drunk, but he loses control of his car. He goes into the ditch, comes out of the ditch, and front ends this bus, okay, and the way he hit it, the way he hit the bus, the way this thing hit the bus, there was a gas tank in the back of the bus, under the door or something like that. The way he hit, the pickup truck hit, the driver survived. The way he hit the bus punctured the gas tank and ultimately caught on fire, so that not everybody, there were several survivors of because it didn't blow up. I mean, the bus pulled over because, again, when you take a small Toyota pickup truck versus a bus, there's a certain thing about, I was an insurance adjuster dealing with car accidents all the time, so I know this kind of stuff. So when you have a small car hits a big car, the small car is the one that takes the majority of it's like rolling a volleyball into a bowling ball. Okay, they're both about the same size, which is going to bounce. Okay, the volleyball is. But it punctured this gas tank. The bus caught on fire, and injuries and deaths occurred. And what's interesting about it is it was the bus was a Ford bus, a Ford-made bus, and it came out that Ford, the engineers at Ford had come up with an idea to create a shield around the bus, around that gas tank, and Ford rejected it because it would add cost to the bus, and buses are usually sold on a very low budget kind of thing. And so this has nothing to do with Ecclesiastes, but I just remember reading this book called The Carrollton Bus, I think what it was called. But again, I worked for Ford for 30 years, so this was something that was, and so there was a collective lawsuit against Ford for not putting the shield on, and Ford lost and ended up paying a lot of money, even though it was a drunk driver going the other way that caused the collision. Had they put the shield up, the argument was, had they put the shield up, had that shield been in place, he wouldn't have punctured the gas tank and nobody would have been injured in the bus collision. And so now there's shields around all of the gas tanks on school buses. But so today is Timothy Dwight's birthday. Timothy Dwight. Yay, Timothy Dwight. Timothy Dwight, who is a grandson of Jonathan Edwards. He was the president of Yale University, I believe. Might be Harvard. I think it's Yale. A cousin of Aaron Burr, by the way, because Aaron Burr, who killed Alexander Hamilton, is also a grandson of Jonathan Edwards. But Timothy Dwight, born on this date in 1752. In 1885, Otto Klemperer was born. Otto Klemperer, a German-American conductor, composer, very famous. Most of us know Otto Klemperer most because his son, Werner Klemperer, was Colonel Klink on Hogan's Heroes. So that's his claim to fame. He's famous in his own right, but most of us know him because his son was there. And finally, it was on this date in 1936 that Walden Robert Casado was born. Walden Robert Casado. We're going to be talking about Walden, better known as Bobby Darin. Mac the Knife and Beyond the Sea. He was born on this date in 1936. So there you go. That's your history. That's your history. That's your development of what happened on this date. So what happened in Ecclesiastes? Well, today we're going to talk about Ecclesiastes 10 and 12. We're going to blow through and as we go through and look at this, we'll discover that there's a lot of repetition going on. To me, I'm like, whoever the frame narrator is and starts putting things together. Because again, I don't think that Kohelet has just got 10 chapters worth of material that he just lists out and writes. I think it's just a collection of readings and writings and things, whether they're from Solomon or someone who reported to Solomon or what. But I think there's a lot of repetition today. We ended last week talking about wisdom, and it says in verse 18, chapter 9, verse 18. Wisdom is better than the weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And I ended up last week talking about how it only takes one. It only takes one person, the right one person, to cause a tremendous amount of issues. I mean, for example, right now we've got there was a 21-year-old National Reserve Guardsman, I believe. Could be wrong on his actual. I know he's 21, who had access to a bunch of classified documents relating to the U.S. involvement in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and he decided to leak them all, and it's causing all kinds of grief in the political world. It's just this one 21-year-old just happened to have just one guy, and now it's causing, for good or ill, it's causing all kinds. Just takes one. And then continuing on in chapter 10, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So, ladies, there's another reason to keep your perfume bottles covered up so that flies don't get in it. Some practical wisdom from Ecclesiastes. But the point is, what's one little fly going to do? As dead flies, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So again, it's just, it's when you're in an organization, and one of the reasons why organizations, and movements tend to get very focused is because it just takes one person, one wild card, and off you go. Okay, but moving on, verse 2, let's see. As one sinner destroys much good, so dead flies make things smell. And as a matter of fact, dead things make things smell. So the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Okay, so he's going to do some contrast here between the wise and the fool, sort of along the line of Proverbs. And here it isn't, there's nothing inherently, the fact that the heart of the wise goes to the right and the heart of the fool goes to the left, that's, the point is that they're going in opposite directions. Not that right is correct and left is wrong. It's just they're going this way and one going the other way. Something along that line. Okay. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. Okay? This is kind of an intriguing idea. So that it's like Kohelet is stating that he can tell just by how a person walks whether that person is a fool or not. And it's interesting. We all know the look. You ever walk around and you know what it looks like when you see somebody who doesn't know where they're going? We all know the look, right? And sometimes if we're in a magnanimous mood, where it's like, can I help you? Are you looking for something? Or have you ever been driving behind somebody who's not sure about where they're located? Like you're going through the subdivision, and they know they have to turn at the blue house on the corner, and they're looking, is that a blue house? Is that a blue house? And you're like, come on. You don't know where you are, kind of thing. And so Kohelet is just saying, by the way they're looking, you can tell they're a fool. Now, this kind of reminds me of the way we're coming to the end of the school year over at the illustrious high school where I've been subbing for some time now. But we're coming to the end of the school year, and the way nobody walks in the school that I'm at. The idea of walking from point A to point B, that doesn't happen. Nobody walks. At best, they saunter. Okay, I mean, and the worst thing in the world is to get stuck behind a group of kids walking to class, because they're sauntering. It's just kind of when I was at college, they had this. You had the dating, or you had the dining common over here. You had the girls' dormitories over here, and it was a typical thing for the guys to meet up with their significant other and walk them back to the girls' dorm. Okay, and that was called the snail trail, and it was on one side of the sidewalk, and you had to be moving. This was one of the rules. You couldn't stand. You had to be moving. So there was this collective long line of, guys and girls just walking. Am I right? Is it the snail trail, right? It was one side. You couldn't take up the whole sidewalk, because then all the single girls would be walking along, let's go, people, come on, But that was the snail trail, and it's like I'm on the snail trail at the high school whenever I have to go somewhere, and if they're not, they're buried in their phone, and so they're walking. When you're buried in your phone, you're walking like this. You're not in a straight line, people, straight line. Walking into each other and all of that kind of stuff, but just how they walk, kind of thing. Kohelet says, you can just tell by how people walk, whether they're a fool or not. Okay, you can tell how. So then, beginning with verse 4, he's going to start transferring into a little bit of wisdom relating to how to deal with a king, and the king thing. And again, this is, and I've been pretty clear. I'm of the Solomon is not the author of Ecclesiastes, because there's just some criticisms that it just seems odd coming from the king, if he is in fact the king, when you have the authority, you're the king, change it. That's a problem, change it, fix it, whatever the problem is. But if a ruler's anger, verse 4, rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. Remember, I read a book years ago. Actually, I read it. I think I have a copy of it. The Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense. Is anybody familiar with that book? It's from a long time ago. And it was kind of talking about dealing with conflict situations. And one of the things that this author points to is going to computer mode in your conversation, where if somebody comes up to you and says, "Boy, you're an idiot and you dress funny." Not that that's ever happened to any of you. To me, it's a regular. No, I'm just kidding. But and at that point, you have the choice of saying, oh, if I'm an idiot, I'm a genius compared to you. That's kind of what we want to say. And this person's point was that that's just going to escalate the situation. Where she said, go to computer mode. And computer mode is where it's very neutral. Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it. Thank you for your stuff, kind of thing. And I think here, if you have somebody raging at you, and the king, if you're there and the king is raging at you, he's like, don't stomp out of the room. It's just, again, there are some things in Ecclesiastes that are pretty good advice. We'll get to some of those in a bit. That makes sense. Don't be calm. Let him get it out of his system, kind of thing. If you're a parent, you've had that situation where you learn. Sometimes you learn the hard way that your kid comes in or your spouse comes in and he or she are just raging over something. And, being the parent, you want to just step in, well, here's how you fix that. Okay? And again, husbanding 101, don't. Okay? Don't. My younger son is he just graduated with an MSW. Ask him, he'll tell you all about it. A Master of Social Work. And he's on occasion we've talked about, his techniques or what he does. And so kids come into his office and tell him things, and one of his standard responses was something like, oh, that must have been really hard for you. And so I don't know what I was talking about or something like that, but he just looks at me and goes, well, that must have been very hard for you, kind of thing. And then he paused for a minute and goes, you see what I did there? That's social work right there. Then
that takes a master's degree, huh?
Yeah. Then I hit him on the head with a stick, and I said, that's bad parenting for you. Just kidding, I did not do that. I'm going to edit that part about the stick out of the film. But no. So yeah, it's just kind of talking about, calmness. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest, kind of thing. Verse 5, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Okay, this is a problem with rulers. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Okay, so appointing the wrong person to a position is an error that kings do. I've seen fools. Yes, that has been known to happen. Even as fools walk along the road. I'm sorry, I'm back up there. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. Now, what's interesting here is Kohelet here clearly believes that the rich should have the good positions. Okay, which is kind of interesting, based on if you look at it's just looking at other passages in James chapter 2. James, who was believed to be the half-brother of Jesus and the pastor of the church at Jerusalem, James has some, so Kohelet thinks it's a bad thing that the poor are in charge and the rich are in low positions. The rich should be in charge. James says in chapter 2, my brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you stand there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges of evil thoughts? Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of him to whom you belong? So clearly, James and Kohelet are not on the same page here. Although the point that Kohelet is making, putting the wrong person in a position, is certainly is a problem. It's a problem in any organization. Organizational fit or being in the wrong position. And sometimes you find yourself, and this is one of the reasons why there's, even in the churches, there's a lot of emphasis on various kind of personality tests and things things like that, so that you know, hey, this is not my thing. Okay, it would not be a good thing to put me in this particular position. Okay. I mean, there are positions that I know I would not, other than just being able to look and say, that must have been very hard for you. Other than that, I would be about the extent of my ability at that point. But be that as it may, he's pointing out this is what life is like under the sun. Getting back to the big picture, what Kohelet is complaining about. He said, this is what life is like under the sun. Absent that whole covenant relationship with God, this is what life is like under the sun. You get fools in wrong positions. You got people who don't know how to walk from point A to point B. You've got dead flies in your perfume. What's there to like about this scenario, okay? And now in the next couple of verses, Kohelet is going to talk about a couple of pitfalls, I guess, or possible errors that might take place. Beginning with verse 8 and 9, he talks about the dangers in 4 occupations. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. So he talks about that digging a pit might fall into it. And I think his point here for all of these 4 is to just be careful. Okay, it's interesting because in Proverbs 22:29, Psalm 7:14 through 16. I put the passages there on your handout. The same idea, only from a different perspective. Okay, there in Psalm 7:14 through 16, it's like, whoever digs a pit for the purposes of capturing somebody, it's going to backfire on him. And he's going to fall into the pit and be captured, hoisted on his own petard, as Shakespeare would put it, that he might fall into it. So it's kind of a different perspective. Here, if all we had were just this first line, we would say, well, maybe he's saying the same thing. But the other 3 in the line kind of make you think, no, he's just pointing out that, and I think his point might be that, people aren't careful. Maybe as they're walking along the road, they're falling into pits, okay? Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. So, Debbie was all set to take down a wall at our house until we were reading this passage. And she says, wait a minute, the Bible says there might be a snake over there. Yeah, but that's Ecclesiastes. I don't care. It's the Bible. You're doing it. I'm like, and then I punched through the wall and there was no snake, but my hand hurt. And she said, well, that must have been very hard for you. But just kidding. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Okay, and that's, it's one of the great things on YouTube or TikTok or something, to various tree falling videos. And they're only funny when they fall where they're not supposed to fall, which is interesting because we're going to get into that in a second. So I'm going to hold that thought. But verse 10, if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. Now, remember I said earlier that one of the commentaries said that a verse in chapter 9 was the most difficult verse to translate in Ecclesiastes. Well, a different commentator says this one is the most difficult verse to translate. And again, I pointed out the translation problems that happen in Ecclesiastes just because there's very little to compare it to. Although I don't think it's that difficult. Well, at least the way it's looking at it here, clearly the translators of the NIV think that this ties back into verse 9. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. So one of the easiest ways, this is coming from an experienced Boy Scout leader, one of the easiest ways to hurt yourself using an axe is to use an axe that's not sharpened. Because it takes more strength and it doesn't bite as well, more likely to slip, and an axe that's slipping, and by slipping I mean not chopping into the wood and kind of going off like that, you have to sharpen the axe. And the trouble with sharpening axes is the same thing with sharpening anything. Sharpening scissors or any kind of blade is it's an art. It's as much as an art as it is a science. People who live by their scissors, you just ask them, And they've got a guy who sharpens their scissors. You don't just, you don't just buy one of those little things and go, and think it's done. You pay the money and you go. I just remember once, years ago, my mother, would did a lot of sewing. She still does, to a certain extent. But I remember once she found somebody who could sharpen her scissors, and was very, very happy that she'd found someone to do that. And I remember thinking at the time, now what did I know? I was just a kid. Like, seriously? Why don't you just get one of those little, foolish boy, kind of thing. But yeah, it's just skill. One of the parts about being skilled in any particular topic is recognizing the need to sharpen make sure your tools are in good shape. Cleaning off your tools, putting them away, or that kind of stuff. But skill will bring success. Then, if a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. Okay. Now, here again, he's kind of, is he developing this last thought about breaking through a wall and there's a snake over there? How big a deal are snake charmers at the time? And I think the point he's making here is that if you accept the reality or the legitimacy, oh, here, I didn't give you guys, of a snake charmer, if you respect the legitimacy of a snake charmer, a snake charmer is not doing you a whole lot of good once the snake has bitten. Okay, so there's two ways to take this verse. What is the point that Kohelet is trying to make? Well, on the one thing is wisdom after the fact isn't much use. Okay, although we're all really, really good at that. I should have a PhD in, wisdom after the fact.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah. So my hindsight's like 20/10. I'm just telling you. It's like, look back and go, you shouldn't have done that. Really? Thanks. Amazingly enough, it's never received very well. You ever notice that? I know exactly what you did wrong. It's like, I don't want to hear. That's kind of that's when you go into the computer mode and you get the calmness and you just say something like, that was very hard for you, kind of thing. But that wisdom after the fact isn't a whole lot of good. If you have wisdom, say something ahead of time. Say something ahead of time. I don't think this is a good idea. At a minimum, I've got a bad feeling about this, kind of thing. And be specific. And again, this is kind of getting into like a group discussion sort of thing. Be specific. I know I've been in several meetings and discussions about with groups. And it's like, well, we're going to do something. We want to do this. We want to do X, whatever X is. And somebody's response is something along the line of, well, I just don't have peace about that. That's not a help. Why? What's wrong with that idea? Tell me what's wrong with the idea. I just don't have peace about it. Okay. And then after the fact, this person would come back and go, see, I told you guys you shouldn't have done that. Here's, well, you could have said something a little. Sorry, I digress. Words from verse 12. Let me make sure. Digging pits might fall in them. Wall removal might get bitten by a snake. Quarry work might have one fall on you. Cutting trees might have one kill you. Q believes that skill will bring success. Proverbs 22:29, Proverbs 22:29 says, do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. Actually, I remember the King James. Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men, kind of thing. But here talking about being skilled in your business. And skilled in your business, includes knowing whether or not your tools are sharp. Verse 12, words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning their words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. So here, let me go down a little bit. Q's warning about snake bites in 10:11 could mean two things. Oh, I forgot something. Wisdom after the fact isn't very helpful. Okay. And one commentator suggested that perhaps what he's talking about is that some wisdom isn't worth gaining. maybe we don't really need a snake charmer. Maybe learning how to charm snakes is not the most useful skill, life skill in the world. Some of us have thought about that and say, maybe that's the point he's trying to make. I don't know. I like the wisdom after the fact idea. Now in verse here going on, Q points out that fools like to multiply words. Fools like to multiply words. Now again, here this is in 6:11. If you remember, the more the words, 6:11, the more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? So if this is Kohelet, if Kohelet is Solomon, or if he is somebody at court, somebody who has been hanging around there, he's heard the whole, flowery speeches. And remember, we talked about brevity being the soul of wit from Hamlet earlier. But he says, and fools multiply words. End of verse 14. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? Now, think about this again. We said at the very beginning, one of the things about Kohelet and one of the things about Ecclesiastes is that there's, death is it. After that, there's nothing. Okay? Now, or at best, and I think this is probably a little more consistent, there's no idea what's coming. Whereas at this point, we've got well-developed ideas of this is what heaven is going to be like, and this is what hell is going to be like, and all the different possibilities there. And I think most religions have some concept of an afterlife, whether it's reincarnation or anything, whatever. There's something where at this point it's not well developed. And here he says nobody knows. Nobody knows. Remember the passage earlier, and I think I made a line there, right? No one knows what is coming, verse 7:14. It says, nobody knows whether love or hate awaits them, kind of thing. So again, under the sun, nobody knows what's happening. In this environment, nobody knows what's going on. The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. Verse 15, the toil of fools. Again, we're just in a series of wisdom things. There's not necessarily an overall theme. And this is one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of studies on Proverbs either, because you just go from point to point to point to point to point. Although, the toil of fools wearies them, they do not know the way. The toil of fools wearies them, they do not know the way to town. And what was it that Kohelet has just said earlier about how fools walk? You can tell by the way they're walking that they don't know where they're going, or that they're a fool, kind of thing. So something, or they're wandering around the road, or something like that, or you have, you see somebody who's I don't know, you see somebody who's going to a Star Trek. Has anybody ever been to a Comic-Con convention or something like that? I walked in on one once, accidentally. It was a Star Trek convention. I walked in accidentally into a Star Trek convention. It was in Des Moines, Iowa. I was staying at a hotel because I was driving back home from a work assignment. I'd been in Wichita, Kansas, and it's too far a drive to go. So I stopped, got a hotel room in Des Moines, which is a great town, fun town. And walked into this hotel, smack into a group of, I had no idea what. But it's it was literally, you heard how I introduced this, right? I had been in Wichita. I'm now in Des Moines. I walk into this thing, and I say to myself, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Ho! Try the veal. I'll be here all week. No, yeah, there. And I clearly was not in the right place. I'm looking around, and there's there's the, I don't know, there's the captains, and then there's the, all of the different Star Trek sort of people, and then there are various other people all in outfits. Again, it's not, Des Moines is not a big town, well, compared to Chicago. It's a big enough town. But, and there were several hundred there, and I was clearly not in the right place. And you could tell by how I was dressed, But, you see somebody, and I was just thinking, if you see somebody If you go to Navy Pier, has anybody been to Navy Pier? They have this ballroom down at the end. And sometimes they'll have things going on there, and you can tell by how people are dressed where they're going. And if they're going the wrong direction, you can just tell, hey, they're going in the wrong direction. And I think Kohelet's point is just to say, I could just tell these guys are going in the wrong direction. You could just look at them and know they're going in there. They don't even know their way to town. Okay. The woe to the land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at a proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Okay. Now, again, this is interesting because you remember earlier, where am I here? See, Q points out fools like to multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Okay, if I missed. So earlier in chapter 4, he told a little story. He said, better but a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who knows how to heed a warning, where he's comparing and contrasting a young king as opposed to an old king, or a poor but honest youth is better than an old and foolish king. And now here he's like, woe to the land whose king was a servant, or whose king is another way to translate that, whose king was young, kind of thing. So it's like, okay, and so it's like Kohelet is like, under the sun, it's bad when you've got this, it's bad when you got that. It's like, under the sun, this is the best you're going to get. I'm back on chapter 4 here. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Yeah.
Would we be going back to what we said about fools are in high positions, rich occupy low ones, slaves on horseback, princes on foot?
Yeah. Yeah, just,
Back to that.
it's kind of a running thing of the wrong people in positions of power. This is one of the characteristics of life under the sun, life outside of the covenant God relationship. That once you abscond out, or once you exit that environment, this is what you end up with, kind of thing. This is, if Debbie ever chose a life verse for me, this is it, coming up in verse 18. Ecclesiastes life verses. Through laziness the rafters sag, because of idle hands the house leaks. So she doesn't tell me that the faucet is leaking anymore. She just, my dear, I was just meditating on Ecclesiastes 10:18 today. And of course, I have no idea I have to look it up. No, I'm kidding. That's not Happy Mother's Day, dear. I'm just saying. No. Because of idle hands the house leaks. Okay. Through laziness the rafters sag. Yeah, I think it's just makes sense, right? And actually it's, even within some of these are just like Proverbs. Again, it's wisdom literature, principles of life, and some of Kohelet's kind of ties into this. Others are just, this makes sense. Because of laziness the rafters sag. I mean, it's when you buy a house, when you buy an old house, or Marty, you were in plumbing for what, and I'm sure it's ever happened to you where somebody calls you up and says, come out here and can you fix this? And so you get in there and you start taking it apart and you see some really weird setup, and it takes you a while to figure out, what were they thinking? What were they trying to do? What were they trying to accomplish? I built a deck on the back of my house back, 1999 or something like that, 98 or something like that. And then about 10 or 15 years later, I had to replace the wood on the deck. So I remember I'd taken the wood off of the deck, and it took me a while to sit there and figure out, what was I thinking here when I did this? How was I? Because there's the house is not like at a complete angle, 45 degree, 90 degree angle or something like that. And I'm like, how did I do this? What was I thinking here? It took me a while to figure it out, And the trouble with that is you can't really just complain about after a point, you can't complain about the old homeowners, What were the previous homeowners thinking when they did this? Kind of thing. I'd been in this house since 1996, so it's like, okay, who's the idiot who did this? Oh, well. And Debbie's in the background going, through idleness, the roof, I'm sorry. Just kidding. She would never do that. Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. How many of you knew that verse was in the Bible? Anyone? So, I've got, somebody comes up to you and says, I've got a problem. You can do two things. You can say, well, that must have been very hard for you. Or you can say, the Bible says money is the answer for everything. And they'll look at you funny and they'll go, no, it doesn't. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. That's in 1 Timothy 6. Okay, nope. There it is. Okay, so, all right, this is interesting. So what does, getting into the different ways to translate stuff, and this is one of the issues, again, in this particular verse. Now, Robert Alter, who's another Hebrew scholar, and one of his translation, he says, his translation of this particular verse is that money keeps everyone busy. And I think that's a little more accurate, because it does, doesn't it? I mean, we're fixated on it for good reason. It's, it's how we measure our time. It's how we, without money, it's hard to survive. Like the T-shirt, I've been rich and I've been poor, and believe me, rich is better, kind of thing. Money is, here, and one other idea is, feast is for laughter, wine makes life merry. And how do you get to the point where you can have either of these? To have money, okay? Or it could be that in this environment, under the sun, when you don't have that personal relationship, when you don't have that covenant God in your life, when you have rejected that or don't have access to that or for whatever reason, what's left? Money is the answer to everything in this environment. Yes?
I'm sorry, the book that I'm reading, he translates it as wages and talks about how it's working. So like if you're working, he talks about how it's working and being industrious and producing money is the answer for everything.
Is the answer to everything?
Rather than being idle, and because we've had that whole theme of idleness
Yeah.
being bad. So industriousness and producing wages, as he's translating money as wages,
Okay.
is the answer for everything.
And who is that?
Ray Stedman.
So we got people coming in with commentary. Say, check me. Okay. Well,
Sorry.
I see. Okay. No, that's yeah. You could look at it that way, but again, I think this is one of those interesting. Who's got any other translation? Anyone else have a different translation? I'm just curious. King James, ESV, anyone?
I got the King James.
What's the King James say?
Actually, I can't read it too good from here.
Oh.
My glasses are at home.
It's, what verse was it? 10:18, right? No,
19.
verse 19. But money answereth all things. Or another way to put it is there's a money answer for everything.
Yeah, it says money supplies everything that is needed, and money comes from hard work, hard and profitable work. And
Okay. Okay. What did you? Yeah.
I just tossed it in there.
What did you have? What is the?
I have the Net Bible. It's they go with money as the answer for everything, but in the translator's note, they say, or and they put this in brackets, they think that money is the answer.
So, verse 20. Now, again, verse 20. Now, I don't. Again, it's the answer to everything in this environment, perhaps, or that's his opinion. It's Kohelet's opinion that in the environment as he sees it, money is the answer to everything. Okay? Again, great, if I were going to choose a life verse out of Ecclesiastes, this might be it. But I've made it clear Ecclesiastes is not a great book for choosing life verses. Yes.
Could I just add one more?
Sure.
On my note, it said it could be a wry comment on human values. You
Okay.
can just add that to the list.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing about Ecclesiastes. I mean, this is actually a good. I mean, it's like how money is the answer to everything. Okay, well, that's what the text, how this person translates it, and money keeps everyone busy, or wages keeps everyone busy, or maybe he's being, we don't really know, because with Ecclesiastes, and this is the translation problem with Ecclesiastes, is that there isn't a lot of comparable literature out there to go up against and say, here's what he's trying to say. We try to keep it within the context of the bigger book and say, okay, well, so it's like, which is it? I don't know. I'm not going to get in and say, thus saith the Lord, because it's, I don't know, verse 20, some more practical wisdom here. Do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. Okay? And again, remember we talked back earlier, he says, don't insult the king, someone may report you. Where he says earlier, where's the passage I was looking at? In 7:21, he said something similar. He talks about don't pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For you know in your heart that many times you have yourself cursed others. And now 3 chapters later he says, you remember that cursing others? Don't do that, because somebody's going to tell on you. Somebody's going to report. Somebody's going to denounce you. I remember years ago, my in-laws had a building. It was the one you grew up in, where they had rented out. They had a 2-flat. It was a 2-flat, and they'd rented out the upper floor and the main floor, and then they'd rented out the basement. Well, you weren't supposed to rent out the basement, because it was a 2-flat, and you don't have to have 2 ways in, all that kind of stuff. And apparently somebody told somebody, and it got to the city. And I remember I was talking to her mom about it, my mother-in-law, and she was just going on and on about how somebody had denounced them. Someone had denounced them, which I just thought was a really interesting word, because they're coming from an Eastern European, you get denounced there, but so somebody's going to denounce you, so don't go complaining, or be careful who you complain about. It never ceases to amaze me in the news these days when you hear stories about somebody saying something, or sending emails back and forth about what a jerk they think so-and-so is. Like, seriously, why did you put that in writing? Why did you email something out? It's like, when you put something in an email, if you put something on a piece of paper, at least there, you can always say that, that there's only that piece of paper. Now, I get there's copying machines, but when you put something in an email that, I think so-and-so is a jerk, you told the universe, kind of thing. I don't know, but be that as it may. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now, here's the English, or the NIV is, ship your grain across the sea, after many days you may receive a return. Now, this is a very popular verse, especially in the prosperity gospel universe. Pardon me?
I said, yes, you're right.
Yeah, in the prosperity gospel universe. And in the King James, you may recall, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Cast your bread upon the waters. Has anybody heard that phrase used? And the Bible tells us to cast our bread upon the waters. Okay, well, yeah, the Bible also says that money is the answer to everything. Well, see, they work together. Cast your bread upon the waters. Here, the NIV translators have put in that conditional element to it. Now, the King James says, cast thy bread upon the waters, and for thou shalt find it after many days. Meaning it's going to come back to you. So the idea there is that you cast thy bread upon the waters, give to the ministry, and after many days you will get back. And then you start throwing in presto or overflowing and all the other verses kind of thing. You can come back. Whereas the NIV throws in the conditional element to it. It says, ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. And actually what he's doing is he's going into just some basic financial advice here, which actually is pretty good. And it's true. You ship your grain across, and maybe you're going to receive a return. I mean, you hope so. That's kind of the whole point. But he's talking about just a financial. He's doing a section of just financial advice here. So again, you don't want to be basing, any serious teaching doctrine action based on something from Ecclesiastes. The Bible says cast thy bread. Whoa, where in the Bible does it say that? Kind of thing. And then when they say Ecclesiastes, you go, okay, wait a minute, let's dial this back a bit. But and then verse 2, invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. Okay, basically he's telling you to diversify. If any of you have a 401k or in the stock market, you know that that's like rule 1. Well, no, that's rule 2. Rule 1 is don't invest in a company that you work for. That's the Enron lesson. Don't invest in the company that you work for. So, and I took that. I did not, I did not own Ford. Well, I actually did. I had some Ford stock, but it was never my main thing. It was always because, I work for the company. I might as well have some, but it was never my main thing. That's number 1. Don't invest heavily in the company you work for. And number 2, divest. Own a auto company, own a food company, own a, some stocks, bonds, all that kind of stuff. Divest. Okay, because you don't know. Then this kind of gets back to the uncertainties. Like based on the uncertainty that I've been talking about, you really need to have a lot of different irons in the fire. Okay, and then verse 3, again, talking about this uncertainty, this is kind of interesting. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Okay, now here he's just pointing, I think the point of these 2 verses is just to say these things are going to happen whether you like it or not. Okay, the tree's going to fall where it's going to fall. And again, this is where I said I was going to get back to the idea of the funny falling tree videos. And I just say that because just completely by accident, I saw one this morning. Somebody posted on an Instagram reel or something like that, somebody cutting down a tree in their backyard and somebody filming it. You ever watch, come on, confess, how many of us have ever watched Instagram reels or TikTok videos or things like that, And you see some like outrageously stupid things. See, I follow one called Fail Army, where it's just, I think it's all like CCTV kind of things, where they just get these copies of things going completely wrong. I like to think that because otherwise you have the issue of like, who's holding the camera? You watch somebody just doing something that is so outrageously painful to watch. You're like, who's holding the camera? What are they thinking here? But this one today was there's a wife watching her husband get rid of this big tree in the backyard, And this is why you have professional tree, This is why you pay for professionals, okay? So you can fix the plumbing, get it fixed correctly. You don't have to call a plumber someday who's going to look at it and go, what were they thinking? Kind of thing. It's going to, it would have been a $100 job, but because they have to fix what you did beforehand, it's now a $500. Did that ever happen to you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. This actually was a very easy thing before you got in there and fixed it. Now, don't ever come to look at my plumbing. I'm just saying. But be that as it may, so he says this is going to happen. But in verse 4, one of our actions is, he's talking about this uncertainty, and he says, whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. So given the uncertainty of life, if you're waiting for the perfect time to do things, you're never going to. And I think this is a good lesson. There are people that are just afraid to pull the trigger on things, or there's just going to, it's not quite wait. And before you know it, you miss the opportunity. Okay? And again, I think that's, whoever watches the winds will not plant. And whoever looks at the clouds will not, oh, wait, it's going to rain, I better not reap. Oh, no, it's going to rain, better not reap. Next thing you know, your harvest is wasted. Moving on real quick. As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb. There's my Mother's Day link in today. So you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. You You're never going to figure it out. You're never going to figure out how it all works together. So, and again, he's going to get into one of his Carpe Diem passages. Although, when he says you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things, I was reminded of that passage in Job, where Job is demanding an explanation from God for all of the things that are happening to him. And I like how the word demand is used a lot in the 21st century. People demand things. I demand this. I demand that. It's like, yeah, I know. I know you don't understand. I'm demanding this. I heard you. No. Kind of, it just every day in the newspaper there's somebody demanding something. We demand an end to this. We demand a start to that. We demand you address this. Okay, there's got to be a new word. Soon as somebody's got to come up with a new word. I don't know. But Job is demanding an answer from God, and God replies in Job 38. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" Kind of talking about the multiplying words. Verse 4, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Who are you to demand anything? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched the measuring line across it? Et cetera, et cetera. And he goes on and on and on about that sort of thing. You're never going to figure it out, So you cannot understand. So, verse 6, so sow your seed in the morning, and in your evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will succeed. But if you don't do either, neither will succeed. I was in a class the other day, personal finance class. We were talking about, it was one of those rare opportunities where I could actually talk to the class about a subject. And we were talking about financial aid and scholarships and things like that. And I was saying, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of scholarship opportunities. And yeah, you're not going to get most of them. Almost all of them you're not going to get. But it's like, I guarantee you, you will not get every single one you don't apply for. Guaranteed. Absolutely. Will not get any one that you do not apply for, kind of thing. But he says, go do it, because you don't know which is going to succeed. Now, beginning in verse 7, and I'm going to call it here at verse 7 because we're getting into the conclusion. We're wrapping up the book. Okay? Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. It's good to be alive. There was a radio disc jockey in Chicago for years and years. He just died, actually. But he would get on the radio, and he said, I'm so-and-so, and it's good to be alive. Yeah. So it's good to be alive. And then he just died. So here's your irony for you. But, yeah, it's good to be alive. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. You're not going to figure it out. You don't know what's going to succeed, so you might as well just enjoy it. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Again, Kohelet would have been a blast to have at parties. Okay? I'm just saying, Yeah. However many years anyone may live, enjoy them all. But don't forget the days of darkness. Maybe he's the guy that at the meeting you just go, first of all, hey, let's go to Stan. Stan, give us the Eeyore report. Don't remember the days of darkness. Don't forget the days of darkness, kind of thing. For there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. Despite it all, it's all Hebel. It's all this chasing after the wind. Okay? All right. Next week we'll pick it up with verse 9, where he starts talking, you who are young, be happy while you are young, kind of thing. All right. Thank you much. We will finish next week with a big wrap-up of Ecclesiastes, where we'll put it all together.
The latter wins.